We are lighting the candle, a world that works, and I'm Bill Correll. We've been doing this now for better part of 3 years. Kind of in, you know, I think we're into a lot of different types of topics, and I'm also here with one of my besties. I've grown to become really good friends with this beautiful human being, Jan Jeremias. And it's such a pleasure every week to not only look forward to getting together, but to actually spend the time together, which is it's pretty unique. I don't know how many other people on the face of the planet that I have a weekly meeting with that typically runs an hour, and then we just get our lives out of it. It's pretty cool. So, how are you doing today, Jan?
Good, Bill. Thanks. Yeah, and it is a gift, and to realize that you want to spend the time with that person, which is also obviously, what I'm hearing you say. Just because there are people that were, I don't want to say kind of assigned to be with, sometimes, where we don't value that time, and I think that's the gift of, to me, one is aging, because then you realize that you can pick and choose sometimes who you do spend time with, and you can surround yourself with people who you really want to spend time with.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
We get to the point where there's kind of a silent sorting, if you will. And before you know it, the folks that are not making the cut just don't appear on the calendar any longer.
That's right, exactly. Exactly.
So we rarely script a conversation before we get started, but this time that we're going through right now, I think is it's a little bit different. We've both Jan and I had a brief conversation, I think on Saturday, and maybe you could recreate where you want to jump on, Jan. But I think this will be a very timely subject. I think everybody that is listening to us is experiencing some level of grief about something in their life, and almost every single one of them has had a recent friend who's passed, other under circumstances that were either predicted or sudden, or all that. So what are you thinking about that these since we talked on Saturday?
So a few things came to mind as and I had a conversation with a friend of mine this morning, actually. Yeah, I've had four people in my life who have experienced a loss. Two were, you know, more business type associates of mine, and the other two were either clients that I've really come to have a connection with, or friends that have lost a parent. And I was sitting there, and I actually got on the phone with one of my friends this morning, and she's had the same experience, and she's like, I almost feel like people are opting out, like it's a personal choice of, like, where people are deciding it's their time, kind of thing, and that they've, for however you want to believe that, I think that we're in for some interesting times going forward, in the world globally.
Yeah.
And she's like, I think people have opted out. Like, they've decided, okay, well, I don't want to be here for what comes next, kind of attitude. And she said, personally, I feel like I have too much work. She said, my friend, close friend said, personally, I feel like I have too much work to do yet to take an exit. And I was thinking a lot about what she said, that kind of idea of people have decided that, life is challenging. There's a lot going on. Who knows what is going to unfold over the next, number of years. And people are saying, okay, well, I've done my work. I've kind of, my purpose, for now has, depending on whether you believe in, reincarnation or whatever, and my purpose now has come to an end.
It's a lot to absorb, in the moment. Um, I guess what my first thrownness would be to give you a reaction, but let's play devil's advocate for a moment and say, let's say you're like spot on. Um, this is a little different than what we talked about on
I
Saturday.
know, I know.
I appreciate that's what happens with a conversation. It's like, you don't think things change. Here, I'm going to hand you a banana, put it in your pocket, and let's meet again next month and see if it still looks the same, right? Um, Not likely. But so here's let me look for some evidence to support what you're saying. Um, there have been, and I think you and I both know because we're working on a book, and I believe each of us is writing a chapter for it, Faces of Grief, which will be published in December. Um, but I'm not drawing from the book so much, or my chapter even, other than to say it really does seem to me that there has been an unusually large number, just a sheer number of people that have passed for all sorts of different reasons. And I think one of the things that I've noticed the most is how many more folks have had strokes, heart attacks, incidences of different types of cancers, to their major organs. Um, and like, 5 years ago, I was 65 years old. I knew a lot of elderly people in their, 70s and 80s. But since then, since 5 years ago, and specifically, and especially over the COVID period, which I think of in terms of the summer, maybe the spring of 2020. 2019, I guess, was the first incidence in November and December that we'd heard about worldwide of the coronavirus. And then by the time we got to the second week of March, we were in full lockdown for 2 weeks, whatever. Immediately, in that next month, there were three people that I was aware of who had been perfectly healthy. They were old, okay? And I say that with all humility because I consider um, achieving the age of 81 or 82 years old not a bad run, you know. And um, I lost a dear networking friend who I never did hear what happened. I had a meeting with him. We went out to lunch on Friday. We were talking about getting a new group of people together to start a whole new business, coaching solopreneurs that were struggling, and getting money from area corporations for our time to do so, to just to create people with more business acumen out there. And he didn't show on uh, on uh, on Monday, and I reached out to someone and then got a text that said that he had passed on Saturday morning, and they weren't sure why. So it could have been that he was tired because he had just had his 82nd birthday. This guy was a corporate president of a company out in California, and really, really nice man. So I also see that last year when my dad went from kind of struggling and fighting to get every day done. There was always something going on for him that was really a heavy lift, and then he broke his hip in February, and he never recovered from that. The next 3 or 4 months of his life were all in and out of rehabilitation facilities down in Mystic, or in the hospital being treated, and it got to a point where it was time for him to go. And we non-verbally had that conversation, where it really was like a permission that you fought like a champion, and it's got to be a struggle. And oh, by the way, let your beliefs carry you forward and make this a really special moment for for your departure. And then we'll all be here with you, as you say goodbye. So there's that. But then there's also, again, the number was like 25 uh, that had passed by this time last year, including my best friend of 40 some odd years. And again, I can see it in him. He had just gone through like his fifth bout with being diagnosed with cancer and different types of treatments and everything. And they had now diagnosed him as having a new cancer. You know, it's all the same cancer, it just showed up in a different organ, a different part of his body. And we had the conversation on a Friday morning, and I told him, I didn't listen to him saying I'm getting tired. This could be the last trip for me, and no, I wouldn't hear it. And I said, "You got this. You've beaten it 20 times before, in our career together." And he said, "Well, I will see you soon." And I said, "Yes, you're going to get better because you're not a quitter. You got this." And he did lay down on Sunday morning. His son and my godson called me and let me know that he just finally decided it was time to go to sleep. So off the cuff, those are a couple of examples that I can come up with, to make you right.
Well, I think that for me, I've had like two of the people that passed over the last month for me were very unexpected.
Yeah,
Like they were young, like young. Well, one was in her late 70s, but very vibrant and very healthy.
yeah,
It was like this freak accident. It was like, she got hit by a car. So it wasn't like, and then the other woman, from what I heard, sounds very similar to this person who you were supposed to meet with, where, but I mean, I found out she was ill. They're being very, I'm not quite sure what that was, but very young. Like she was 43.
yeah.
And I think that I don't know about what I first said, but I think that I'm hearing more about young deaths. First, I wondered, like over the past few days, I've been sitting with this since I heard about the latest two of like, friends who lost parents and friend of client who lost parents. But I, was trying to think about whether it's my age, whether as you get older, you have more friends that are kind of in the age group. But these are people who are younger. Like these aren't people who I would consider, like, oh my gosh, they decided that, they had, like my dad, who I think, was 91. And I think I've done I've lived a very hard, I'm very tired now. I just want to go to sleep and rest now. I mean, these were people to me, and from the outside anyway, lived very, had a lot, like there was a lot of good they could still do in the world, I guess.
Yep.
And so it's been a little harder for me to, to just sit with that and realize, it's never my place to judge, but kind of like from the people who survive and kind of try to make sense of things and support others who in their kind of in the way they can make sense with it.
Yep.
I've just been sitting with it a lot. And so this was just, I think it's when it's, and I also think it's different when it's young death because we have this feeling that, they had so many more years to go, kind of it, and now they don't.
Yep. Yeah, I'd like to hear some more about maybe some sharing that other people in your circle. I mean, I'm more than happy and capable of doing that myself. But who else have you been speaking with that has kind of reinforced this, the way things look?
Um, do you mean the way things look as far as like the way the future goes in the world? Um, you know,
Well, let's recap the conversation so far in just a few words. What I my takeaway from your first statements that you were making was that you have people who have decided to check out because they weren't interested in continuing with what they could see. What their predictions were about what was going to go on in the world. So that being said, that there was some kind of a volunteer or a decision on their part to just lie down and go to sleep, or whatever it was.
yeah, I mean, I don't know that I have much proof of that, Um, except for the fact, like, and I don't know if that's what they were thinking, but my friend, when she was sharing, she said, I think people are looking at the state of the world, whether that be the state of the planet, the state of global politics, the state of the fact that history repeats itself, and so much of stuff that I thought we had addressed in the past is now happening again. And people are just like, I'm, if this is what the future looks like, then I don't know that I want to be here for it. And I just, I'm like I said, my friend and I are sitting there going like, I have, I still have work to do. Like I still have things that I'd like to do. I still believe that I can make a difference, so hopefully that will carry me through,
You have a
but
lot of evidence for that. You have a lot of evidence for that. But there are people that are not like us in terms of having recently been recognized for being of value in someone's life, which you and I are. We're blessed because we get to do that all the time. And I think that that is really rarefied air. There are a lot of people who just listen to NPR or some TV station, and they are hearing nothing but how human beings are being really awful to each other. And the truth is, like what we heard during COVID about how things were so bad, no, they really aren't that way. That was really what advertisers needed them to put in front of us in order to keep selling ad space.
right,
And
right, right.
but somewhere along the way, there's been a loss of distinction between this is a for-profit company or a venture that has to, get new current income in order to continue as an organization. And once if you lose that, you start to believe things and you start to hear everything as how it is. And that, I think, feeds to what the resignation. And we were talking about this, the hopelessness and the resignation that some people get to. And I think that's a powerful distinction because it really is something where you have to, be able to call time out and go and get some different information for a little while. Maybe you go and see if you can study up the antithesis of exactly what you think you're hearing that everyone is doing. And
Right.
then it doesn't
Or,
take long to find chinks in the story. It really doesn't.
and I think if you either that or like we opened up with that we choose to spend time with each other, and I think the other thing is to surround yourself with people and with information, like surround yourself which keeps you in a space of, let's say, hope. I don't know if you want to use the word hope or positivity or possibility.
Great words,
uh,
all three. Yep.
because if you look out in what people, and I can't even imagine, like I talk to people, um, either that or I'll like have, like I was on the phone with a friend of mine the other day. So she's caring for her parents who are both in their like 80s, so she is saying that one of the things she has a hard time with is that they constantly have the news on, like constantly. And she said, oh my gosh, she's like, I can't, like, I just can't handle it. She's like, and we were talking about that constant negativity and the sort of fear mongering and the whole idea of everything's a catastrophe kind of thing that keeps you in that sort of very cortisol induced, you know,
Yep.
space all the time. And I think that that's the that's the drawback of technology, and the fact that information is so easily, not necessarily correct information, but information is so available all the time. And you have to get to a point where you sit there and hopefully you say enough's enough. Like, okay, I need to know. When I used to drive into the city every day, into Manhattan, for a long time, because I wanted to hear the traffic report. So I would listen to 1010 Wins at the time. So I would sit there and listen, and they repeat the same headlines over and over and over again. And it wasn't nearly as bad. It was like pre-COVID, and it was a number of years ago. But I remember what that was like. And I think it comes to the point where you're like, I really don't like, I can look at the headlines and see what's going on and if there's anything that I need to like pay attention to. But otherwise, I really don't need to listen to this 24 hours a day, every day. That, is it really good for quote? Like, is it really good for my health? Not only
Yeah.
mental health, but physical health to have that kind of stress or anxiety or fear constantly in my physiology.
Yep. Yeah, we are definitely living in the Orwellian predicted time frame, and Aldous Huxley and a few other science fiction writers who also were um, they were part psychologist and part sociologist in terms of how they wrote. But the whole idea was is that when technology gets to the point where people can do wrong with it, they will. Okay. This is what the predictions were. And of course, that's always going to be the government. I don't think their thinking would ever have made the leap to the corporations would someday start controlling the government. Um, because in the 30s when and earlier, like Huxley was writing as early as 1900 and through the 20s and 30s. But the long and the short of all of that was there's a marinating that's going on in terms of themes, in terms of things that are the first time you hear it, it's unbelievable. And then there's different ways that that set of circumstances can be woven into. Like, for instance, when I listen to, my wife listens to NPR all the time. Okay. But like, when did it become so interesting? Like, in the course of a week or 10 days or something, there might be a dozen different instances where I walk into the room and they're always talking about some village in Africa or in Thailand or some Borneo island where some little girl is being abused or something of that ilk, where it's just wrong, but it's also kind of weaving this whole story about, you know um, and I don't even know what I'm talking about here, but I'm going to use some terminology, this whole patriarchal society that's evil. Okay. And quite frankly, it doesn't exist. It only exists in the mind of the people that need to have it in order to have something to fight against. And it's true about all of those isms, if you will. And so, with that in mind, getting back to how do people feel about it? Well, there's something kind of refreshing, and I don't even fully understand it yet. But it's no longer okay in a political campaign this year to call somebody racist. Okay, you got to call them weird. It's a new thing we're doing around here, where when the word has gotten to the point where it really doesn't mean anything anymore, and people say, "Yeah, go ahead and call me. You're going to call me no matter what I do. I took a breath. I must be that R word, right?" So, no, you're going to be weird now, or creepy, or these are we're going to go back to those kind of like sophomoric type things to again, like you were saying before, to make people believe there's something wrong around here. And the more we can have that underlying current of there being something wrong, there's something wrong here, something wrong there, something wrong here. And what I pulled out to use for examples could have been a dozen or 15 different topics. But what I'm saying to you is if you get to the point where um, the thing about a belief is that facts don't change a belief. You know, faith in a belief is something that people die for, whether it's correct or incorrect. And it starts out as just being a news broadcast, right? But after you've listened to it for 10 or 12 years and it's the same different kinds of little stories that are all leading to the same place, um, it's not it's not something that's a news broadcast anymore. It's how things are, even though it may not even be occurring out there in the world at all.
Think one of the like I'm looking at like if you want to give people signs or clues, like as to where they are and what's going on for them. And I think that I kind of look at some of what I've been listening to of late, like on podcasts, and everything. And usually everything is of a much more positive realm.
Yep.
where people are not trying to put people in a category. Like, we're not trying to, we're looking for commonalities versus points that differentiate us. Like, we're looking for, you know, humanity amongst everything versus, differentiation. Um, but one of the things is when you start to me, where you start to look for people to blame for your life circumstances, where it's like, who can I blame and who's responsible? And you forget to look at yourself. You
That's a
forget,
completely irresponsible statement, isn't it?
and when you forget to kind of look at your own life and realize that, okay, what's really going on here? Like, what's the common denominator amongst all these circumstances in my life? And that's me. That's the common denominator. And so I think that when you start to look at outside of yourself for someone or something to blame for your life, kind of an indicator to me that, and I'm not saying, hardships don't come from those types of situations. Like, because I think they do. Like, I've seen, and I've spoken to people who have been let's say prisoners of war. So I know that, but have then taken their circumstances beyond and, are now helping people. So they've overcome like whatever that hardship was. But I do think that there are times when we forget that we're like, oh, okay, I have the ability to change my mind. I have the ability to change my belief. I
Yes.
have my ability, I have the ability to, and fill in the blank, and to realize that, you know, if someone, if you have a circumstance where someone isn't treating you right, you're letting them. You know what I mean? Is you have a choice to disconnect in some way, switch jobs, do something. And I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying that, I'm sure there are circumstances where you can't, but in the opportunities that you can, try to do something that's going to make your life better.
Yes. Yeah. So kind of like coming full circle to the whole conversation about people choosing to lie down and go to sleep versus those of us that would go kicking and screaming and not going gently into that good night. And there's a lot of us, that feel that way. Like, no, this is just too precious a thing. It happens to far. I mean, you do the math on how unlikely it is for either you and me to be here, especially for you and me to be here, right? Um, that's got to be something that has a special significance to it in terms of being worthwhile, just cause, And so when you seek answers and reasons for what's happened to you, it's almost always something that's happened already that is now feeding you the fear of what may happen. You're actually um, you're giving up your power by abdicating your responsibility and accountability for the quality of your own life. And we get trained to do that. That's what the media is paid to do, is to train all of us to operate in our lives like powerless, choiceless, meaningless beings whose life doesn't matter. So what we find is that we have this generation X and then generation Z, uh, both of whom are getting married less frequently, and both of whom are not having children, and many of whom are becoming they're becoming sterilized before they're of age to have children because they're making a lifetime decision. Again, this is a similar thing but different. Their life is okay, they're going to get through it, but they're not going to bring any more kids into this world, you know and that is really such a sad way to look at life and living, as opposed to what's a child supposed to be in the first place. Well, it's supposed to be the celebration of two people's love for each other, such that they want to create a family unit that carries on through time and gives them a richer and more full life experience. It's got everything to do about with what's possible as
Mm,
opposed to what's wrong in the world, if you will.
mm, mhm.
But when you start hearing large numbers of kids who have made a decision they will never get married and they will never have children, or they're gonna have a lot of fun. Don't worry about that. Okay, they're gonna be un uh, unrestrained in their fun having, if you will. But the point of it is it's not fun to create anything any longer. It's fun to escape. It's fun to get numb and then do things that they would consider, if they were not under the influence of some kind of a substance, they would consider it to be, you know not cool, low life, degenerate, all those words that we would have used if we heard about this behavior. But now we find out, no, they go to parties and groups and all this sort of thing, and they behave like who even knows?
But to one of your points, Bill, and that was when those beliefs which are fed, or those circumstances which are fed. I
Yep.
think, we also have the ability to feed ourselves some, based on what's happened to us, some beliefs or some interpretations, which, it's the equivalent of somebody losing somebody and then basically isolating themselves because they're afraid of being hurt again. And
Yes.
I think we have the personal circumstances to do that also,
Right.
where when you look at your life and you say to yourself, yeah, oh, I'm alone, but then realize that the reason you're alone is because you've chosen to be alone in a lot of ways for whatever reason. And sometimes I'm not saying, it's just when you see it for what it is, like the realization of, like, oh my gosh, like I said, the common denominator is me. Like, I've prevented myself from getting over this. I've, prevented myself from not seeking help if I needed help, or or just recognize it for what it is. And then it doesn't have on the same tone. So, yes,
Right.
I'm alone, but I know I'm responsible for that. And it was because of this. And I couldn't, I had to protect myself. I was too fearful or too scared of being hurt again or losing someone again or whatever it is. And just looking at it for this. So I don't think it's necessarily external that comes, that it's not a necessarily result of something external. It can be a result of something internal.
I completely understand what I think you're saying. Uh, and the other part of it that I keep coming back to is, if we were going to use suicide, for example. I mean, and this is really dark, but it's out there and it's true. Suicide in several different groups that are key: seniors, first responders, and also vets, and now children and teenagers. And there is something that's in our culture that he has either created like a worm that is putting that thought in the back of everyone's mind at different times. I think it's a normally human kind of a response to, this is too much, at different times in your life, to go, it would be easier to just lie down and go to sleep. And then we all have that capacity, like you said, to reach somewhere inside of ourselves and say, nope, that's nonsense. We're not doing that. Certainly not doing it today. Um, Yet, and there are literally hundreds of people a day. Just vets, for example, is like an average of 22 a day. And quite frankly, this tells me that what we used to consider as the most valuable commodity in Western civilization, that's the life of a human being. You know, our entire structure, the Constitution of the United States, was to value each individual as a sovereign human being that had value, that had God given, from the Creator, all of these rights and things that no group of people could ever take away from them again. This was to make us different from European, cultures and European uh, politics and all the rest of that sort of thing. Where at some point the actual person, the actual citizen, became valueless, and we've seen that happen in other countries like you know Philippines and India and South America and Africa, where people just don't have value. If we did have value in the United States, how would we be treating some of these things where people are calling it quits?
Well, I think, and to your point, Bill, um, I think that that's so powerful because I look at the communities you just mentioned, and I think when we have poor internal value, and then one is we get no value outside of ourselves. Basically, we're dehumanized outside. Then life is then it's hopeless.
Yes.
Then you feel hopeless. So, for example, with veterans who, my attitude is I may not believe in, whatever the circumstance that they fought under, but if they serve, I'm going to support them to the end because I
Yep.
feel like they've made a sacrifice for me personally in some way. Like I take it very personally. I'm like, I value you. And I'm always the first to say, thank you so much for your service. Cause I realize to the extent that I can realize, not having ever served, what a sacrifice that is. And um, and so to me, when you're not valued once you've done it by outside realms, whether that be the government, politicians, support, you know, and the other thing is like the value of the elderly, where I have to give credit where credit is due to certain cultures where the elderly are really valued. In our
Yes.
country, they're really not. And that's another way where, we've gotten so disconnected in a lot of ways from our older adults, I like to call them, that we don't value the wisdom that they have. We don't value their life experiences. I was on a call with my friend Joe the other day, and we were talking about something, and I said, if you really, to me, if you want to teach history, you get somebody who actually lived through a historical time to actually go and teach that to kids. I said, because it has so much more meaning when it comes from a personal story versus when you read it in a book. When you see somebody living and breathing in front of you who actually lived through that circumstance, there's nothing like it. It's like, wow. And I think that, especially in those, and then in our culture where I don't know how much, I think kids are not valued in the fact that sort of, I want to say our priorities have gotten a little bit skewed. So whether that was intentional or not intentional, but to the extent where, like technology has taken over for being parents and um, where, whatever, because, whether parents by choice or not by choice, just to make ends meet, now are not home. And that's been long ongoing for like, let's say 40, 50 years, 60 years,
Yep.
where all of a sudden kids are basically at home alone or raising themselves and, in other different circumstances. So I have to, you have to figure and wonder about the value these children actually have if nobody really wants to spend time with them. I don't know, that might have been a little long-winded, but that's what came to mind. Is I think the three populations you described to me were three populations of people where I can basically give you examples where I don't think they're valued and I don't know that they had personal value. And so then it's kind of like, well, if I have no personal value and I don't have any value outside, then really where am I here?
It's it comes back to, if you're looking for like for access to change, or how do we improve the situation, what we have to really kind of take a hard look at is that there has been a complete um situational, the word systemic comes to mind, but culturally what we've been trying to do is to emulate communism without having any of the bad stuff. You know what I mean? And this has gone on all over the world where we are, consistently finding ways to remove the family unit, and its structure. Like in where we're talking about veneration of old people in the family, like the Chinese and the Japanese and those traditional values, where generational wealth wasn't between one or two generations. A home might be in a family for 100 or 200 years, and it was the responsibility of the young to get out and do the hard work at the beginning. And when that started to turn into the hard work wasn't going to work in rice paddies or fishing or something of that nature, when there was the opportunity to go to school and to get educated and then become a professional and then make enough money to support the previous generations until they passed, and then that became your birthright to be that person at some point in the future when you're in your 70s and 80s, that your value was to keep the boat going in the same direction that it had been for all that time. Well, we haven't had that. What we've had is we've had the state, the government come and insert itself in the middle of uh, you know I mean, you can lay it at the feet of public education and public schools and all of that sort of thing as the one of the first places where government actually takes over control of kids' minds. Um, and I'm not saying good, bad, or indifferent, but it is an opportunity for mischief. In many cases where you've got 12 years of undivided attention of kids in terms of shaping their morals, their internal compass in terms of what's right and wrong, their behaviors, their feelings about their own value as a human being, as an individual, you know, about whether or not it's okay, to shut free speech down, or whether it's okay, to take a group of people. There always has been this opportunity to victimize a certain group of people. It's always been there in my experience. It's different people at different times for different reasons, but isn't that one of the things that you can count on seeing in most social organizations these days? So, and then when you write laws that make it impossible to get government benefits if you have a family unit, what was that all about?
Or when you write laws or have documentation which are so advanced and so complex that the majority of people can't get through it. I, I always, I was reminded of a podcast I listened to, and the woman who spoke was really great, and she happened to be an attorney, um, very well educated woman from Louisiana originally, and decided that she was from the Bayou. So she was from, and after Katrina, she went back, you know, because that's where she was from and her family was there, and she went back to help. But she said, looking at the forms, let's say that they were given to complete for government funding, and she said, I'm a lawyer and I could barely get through it. And to expect people that were basically, let's say farmers or fishermen or whatever to get through some, and I'm not saying those classes, but let's say very without much education. And I'm not being critical of every, saying that those individuals are necessarily not educated, but a lot of people that have had limited education to get through those forms, which was like nearly impossible.
Well,
And so you have to sit back and realize, one, the agenda behind that, which I don't want to get conspiracy theorist or anything, but you have to question it to me. And to your point, I think education, and if you look back, and yes, I think public education originally was so that everybody had the right to get a free education. And that education was at some sort of base level the same, like for everyone. So I think the original impetus behind it was actually very commendable and really beautiful and served a great purpose, to have everybody kind of have that base, which is every human right, is
Yeah.
to have that opportunity. But when, you know, yeah, but I think once, like you said, beliefs start to come into it or values start to, depending on what values are kind of instilled and what is stressed and not stressed. I had an audio event on Friday, which was really wonderful. And we happened to be talking about creativity and its being creative. So, and its power in overcoming very challenging emotions. So we were talking about grief this past week, but I think we're going to go deeper into other emotions,
Yeah.
um, and processing those emotions. And we were talking about the arts in the schools and the moment that was kind of dropped. So the moment that art classes, let's say in music classes and other sort of classes, were considered extracurricular
Yeah.
and weren't a part of education. And one is because creativity has nothing to do with being artistic. And so being creative, it's actually being creative is like the top skill for employers on LinkedIn looking for people is like creativity.
Yes.
So we're not talking, I mean, it serves a greater purpose than just drawing, but the whole idea of when education became purely analytical and very like the thinking mind versus emotional and experiential.
Yeah. So you said an awful lot, okay? And there's a
Sorry.
couple. No, 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 no. I want to go back for a second here because you've done a really great job over a few minutes to just kind of paint the picture here of how undoable this all is. It's like a huge ball of string with 7,000 ends to it, you know? You can't pull at just one string and ever hope to correct anything or find a way forward that makes life more predictably good. Okay. And two books that come to mind in terms of, I think, if you haven't read them, Jan, I'm going to recommend them. But one is called The Death of Common Sense in America. And I want to say that was written in the 1990s, where they were actually talking about all the laws that had been passed, especially in municipalities, that made absolutely no sense whatsoever and allowed them to build things like, $3 million public restrooms in the middle of Manhattan, that actually served about 2,500 people before they tore them down. Just all of these things, all the rules for ADA that made absolutely no sense. They made sense to the lawmakers, but they just weren't workable and doable. The other book is by our sitting Supreme Court Justice, Neil Gorsuch, which he's got a book out now that's called Overruled: The Human Toll of Too Much Law. And I heard him talk a little bit about it. He said on the books, in any given state, there can be as many as 600,000 pages of law, which is undoable for anyone, which allows any case to be just as unlawful as any other case, as opposed to having a strict set of rules that everybody knows what the guidelines are, and therefore they follow them as a matter of culture. But I think the main thing is that with most politicians over the last 50 years being attorneys, they all had the same thought. And you know that old saying that if you're good with a hammer, you think everything is a nail. Well, how does a lawyer correct a behavior? By making a new law, and always by saying, so this can never, ever, ever happen again. When you hear those words, what you're seeing is somebody that does not have a thinking mind. Okay. What you're hearing is I got to do something to get reelected. So let me publicly say I am doing this for a very noble purpose so that this will never, ever, ever happen again. Hence, we got 600,000 pages of laws that are they're not followable, they're not enforceable, you know. And then let's get on to the next thing that we were talking about.
Can I just comment one thing on
Oh, sure,
Bill?
yeah,
Because as you were speaking, I was thinking of yes, I do listen to a lot of podcasts, but I was thinking about a podcast I just heard, and it was talking to the effect that a lot of time movements or organizations are created, and we don't realize their that there's a point where at points that their benefit ended, that what we tend to do is try to then mold it so that all of a sudden it reapplies. It all of a sudden we've given it a new mission or a mission statement, and we've kind of redirected to include other people or whatever. But really, we should just say this is done and it served its purpose. This is what we learned. What can we learn to create a new movement?
yes,
And I kind of feel like that when I mentioned public education, because I feel like we should probably say, okay, the form at which it's in isn't serving its purpose. It's done. We need to come in and not redo and kind of reorient what we have going. We kind of need to start from scratch. And this woman was talking about it in regard to the prison system.
yes.
And when you realize that the entity that you've created served its purpose and it's now over, it served its purpose. And now instead of trying to like I said, mold it into something so that it's now reapplicable, is kind of like, do you look at it and say, okay, what did we learn? This was the good things. This was didn't work. This was the failures. And now we take the good things and we create something brand new, brand spanking new from this new thing. So as you were talking about law, that's what I thought about. And when I was talking about education, that's what I was thinking about. Of like, did we just say this is done now? Like this isn't working. And we take what it is and we kind of go in and do a massive rehaul. A totally renewal.
So actually going back to what I was saying earlier about how you would get to a point where there'd be any agreement is exactly how we've destroyed the structure and the integrity of what used to work, albeit not fairly for everyone, but mostly the people didn't break the law because they thought they'd be held accountable. And now they break the law routinely because they're pretty sure they won't. With that kind of a culture, and I love, Stephen Covey. I've always loved him. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. His statement about cultures where where the community is of a certain strength, laws are unnecessary. Okay, and in communities that are where the integrity is missing and they're not of a community strength and the culture is not strong enough, laws are unenforceable. You can't enforce laws against half the population at a time. And when we're living through a period of time now where it's fashionable for one part of the population to be vilifying the other part of the population, what have we done to our culture? I say we've destroyed that fabric. And now, how would people other than you and me, from an academic standpoint, which is about as far as you and I can reach, we can have a logical conversation about what might work in the future. But in terms of executing and actually getting that to exist, in the world, um, who are the people that are going to execute? Who are the people that are going to build it and protect it and make sure that the nonsense doesn't destruct it, on the way to launch? But you can take a look at our prison system. You can take a look at our justice system in court, and how that works and how long it takes to get something put through a court case. Just even simple things like that. How about local government? I think what it comes down to is the whole notion of laws ever correcting human behavior is it's nonsense. And originally, the penal system, which we don't call it that any longer, the penal system was for penalizing people that broke the law. Few laws, pretty straightforward. You could argue to get the laws changed. That's pretty cool. But we were not surreptitiously creating a law for every single human behavior.
Well, and also I look at what needs to happen, and what needs to happen is behavior changes. So a change in a law or the penal system is not going to change a behavior. And and in this, and when I was reading something about, if so if somebody is from an abusive home, they always say they're likely going to abuse,
Yep.
because that it takes something like 5 generations for that to be reversed. Or even if you don't believe it's five, it's a number of generations where you have to where you have to intervene and give whoever's enough support and help, however you want to label it, so that that behavior is not passed forward.
Right.
And so, if you look at a law, if you penalize somebody and you don't do anything else regarding that circumstance, it's basically a waste. Like, you're not doing anything to have an impact going forward. All you are is then like the likelihood of that, whoever was the victim of that abuse is going to go out and become the abuser, is really high. So unless you go in prepared to really make a difference, and that was very impactful to me. I thought to myself, 5 generations. Like, so even if you don't believe it's that many, even though I could believe it is that many,
Well, even if it's two, that's still
two,
50 years, you know?
50 years. And you're sitting there and you're saying, okay, well, we changed this law. This person's gone to jail. They've been punished or whatever. But we still have the same problem.
Right. So the other part of it is that when I mentioned this a little bit earlier, when you get people that are increasingly looking to see how they can numb themselves to the experience of their daily lives and get through it somehow, can you even imagine having a large percentage of a whole generation who can't stand just living their life? They don't have the uh, they don't have the training. They don't have the sense of self, the value of self, that knowing that you got from yesterday to today is audaciously going to give you the courage to get from today till tomorrow. And quite frankly, if people just honored what it took to get this far in life, make one more decision that it's not going to happen today. The bad things are not going to happen to me today. I'm going to stand up for me because I'm the only one who can. There's nobody else, though. That's where the government comes in and says, yes, we'll stand up for you. We'll make sure this can never happen. No, and I'll tell you what, it's gotten worse. So I don't want to make the people that are in the system bad and wrong. I only want to make them start thinking and wake up, to like what you're saying. We have to have some corrective action simply because we started this conversation talking about how people lay down and leave. Well, in many cases, they laid down a long time before they got to the point where they decided to leave. And why wouldn't we aspire to have the best opportunity for every single citizen to have the best day ever, every single day? Can you
Mhm.
even imagine?
As you're talking, Bill, the one thing that came to mind is I was thinking to myself, like, and you always, many, many, many times on our talks, you end with saying, pick up the phone and tell someone you care. And I was talking to someone and they were saying that they were in a group and it was a group of young people.
Yes.
And they were saying that basically, if something happened, they had no one to call. Like they have 1,000 friends on Facebook or social media or whatever platform they're on, but
Yes.
but that's not someone they could just pick up the phone and call. And I was thinking about, as you were saying that, is, when I had those experiences of those four losses, and I said, and I picked up the phone and called you and said, oh, and I know you've had that over the past like year kind of thing. But I thought to myself, well, there was someone to call, like there was someone that I could reach out to. And so if you don't have someone, I don't, you know, I mean, I'm not saying that don't call anybody, call a hotline, call someone, but find someone that you can call. Like cultivate that kind of relationship.
Yeah.
And then also for all of us out there, let's say, is check in with people. Like, I mean, if anything, that's what you learn. You never know what's going to happen. And you just feel like on the other end, you know, make sure the people in their life know they're special and that they're important to you. And then
Yeah.
also find someone to call.
If you don't mind, I would just like to share a story, and I'll do the best justice that I can, but don't hold me to all the factual data like where it is or anything. But I heard a police officer one time who was a sergeant in a metropolitan force, and they had a bridge that was notorious for people jumping and committing suicide off of. And he had the responsibility to go back and do the backstory on all of the folks that were successful, in terms of ending their lives jumping off this bridge. And he said, I want you all to know there was one case in particular that was different. And he said, I got to the man's house after finding out who he was and where he lived and everything. And we went in, and of course there was a note, and the note that was pinned, to his a mirror in the bathroom said the following. It said, I can't do this anymore, and I'm on my way to the bridge. And if one person, just one, asks me how I am, I will come back. So my takeaway from that is, why wouldn't we just encourage people to have the best day ever every chance that we can? And by golly, just ask them how they are. That was a really powerful message. And this might be as good a place as any for us to do a wrap, my friend. Would you like to invite people to do anything in particular this week?
Besides for finding someone to call or to call someone or both to let them know that they matter to you. My new practice, and I've been doing this with a number of clients, is just to actually sit down for a few seconds. Doesn't have to be long, and I say a few seconds.
Yeah.
Just ask yourself how you feel, and depending on how that is, think of one thing you could do that would make yourself feel better. And I'm not taking it, and wasn't referring to anything like any sort of negative behavior, like to me, negative behavior. It was like, okay, have a drink of water, get outside in nature, you know, write for a few minutes, get creative, um, move in some ways, dance, sing, whatever it is. What could you do that would make yourself feel better? So that's my invitation.
It couldn't be more perfect. Thank you so much. We are lighting the candle, a world that works, and the world does work, ladies and gentlemen. You just got to keep working it. Thank you, Jan. I love you, and thanks for another hour.
Yes, thank you, Bill.
Bye for now, y'all.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, A World That Works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch every episode as well as the rest of the network at exvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.